Hi. Cool. So I'm glad you guys could all join this panel. We're going to be talking about MSX computers, which I'm really excited about. I've been excited about MSX computers for too long. It's kind of a weird hobby. I'm Steve Lakawicz. I perform a chiptune under APOC, if you don't know who I am. I did a set this today on Chip Space. Played main stage last year, so it was pretty fun. I'm going to open this Red Bull because I'm going to need it. All right. So let's get started with this. We'll have the sound eventually, so I'm going to flip some of the stuff around. We'll go over some of the other stuff first. So what the hell is an MSX? Well, it's a complicated thing. It's not a single computer. It's actually a standard of computers, kind of like the modern PC today is made by a bunch of different companies. It's not like one company makes a PC, like you can get a Toshiba or this is a Dell or whatever. So MSX was a standard, agreed upon idea of what a PC or a personal computer should be. And so lots of companies made MSX computers to a certain standard so they were all compatible together. That was the general idea. Here's a couple of them. It's a Sony HP10P. The Hitachi ones were built for business model. They're all kind of really, like, I guess, businessy. And you can see, like, it has a little stand that kind of puts it up. You can also use it as, like, carrying it. Like, people would, I imagine some nerd would probably, like back in the day, considering that they had this computer and not like a PC-98, would be carrying this around, like, by the handle on the subway or something like that. Mitsubishi also made them, which is kind of cool. They bowed out very quickly, but the very first MSX was a Mitsubishi MSX, the ML8000, I believe is the right number, 8000, 9000. October 23rd, 1983, I believe is the first one. And then the Sanyo has them, and they're kind of like cool design. I think the Sanyo ones are really fun. They also have the most problems, so don't buy a Sanyo. So why was there like a need for standard of computers? Well, and there's a lot of text here, but basically the idea is in the early 80s, there wasn't a standard. Computers couldn't talk to themselves. Like, you can't have a Commodore 64 talking to you. I mean, arguably you can, but you can't have the TI-99 or any of the particular like products that were there. They were not compatible with each other. They used their own individual versions of BASIC, which is really funny because BASIC all comes from basically the same place, which is Microsoft. But they still couldn't talk to each other. So that meant, like, if you were in Japan, if you had a PC 6001, which is like the predecessor to the PC-98, which some of you may know, there's no way that you could be completely compatible without doing some kind of magic to make it work with an FM7. And that Fujitsu's FM7 series, which were both 8-bit computers concurrent to kind of time. There's a perceived market, therefore, of computers that could make this a lot simpler. The idea that there was a plain and easy standard by which computers can communicate, and if we could figure out a way, if we could all just agree that this is what defines a computer, then we could actually just make programs for everyone. We don't have to have like this version and this version and this version and this version, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they kind of set out to design something that would be the easiest and simplest way to do this. The requirements for this were they wanted off-the-shelf parts. They wanted parts that you could buy that would be very easy to obtain. So basically, you could go somewhere, you could just grab these parts. They're easy and they're cheap. That way, everyone can just grab them. There's nothing proprietary. It's all standard stuff. This is the spec sheet, which I'm sure your eyes will glaze over about, but it's basically a Z80-based computer. The original standard, this is actually from, let's see. I had a caption, I removed it. But this is actually from the standard book that they would hand you that says this is what it is. And then it has all the specs. So you had to have these things in order to be an MSX. It's very tiny here, but the original one had to have 16K bytes of memory, which is very small. If anyone knows, like, working with things like that. It had to be a Z80 compatible, and it had a sound. It had an AY8910 or 8910 in it. So those are kind of those things. And basically, it's a cartridge-based system. I have some props. So what's really cool is it's a cartridge-based system. It needs to have 2 different slots for cartridges, or some of them had 1. The very early ones had 1. Get a cartridge here, you get a cartridge on the back. Most of them have 2. The very early ones have 1, and they're kind of useless because almost everything after that had 2. Fantastic. Hooray. Okay, let's just... Let's see. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Cool. Sorcerian. Okay, cool. Great. Now that's out of the way. Let me just turn this back on. Or I'll turn it back on in a second. So basically, MSX1 was defined, and then they started to update it. So that's kind of like an update, like, hey, everyone, we're making MSX2 now. This is what it is. Make it. There's a 2+, and eventually Turbo R, which was like the very end of it, which we'll get into. Very brief, I promise, brief history of MSX, maybe. So the MSX Standard was designed by Kazuhiko Nishi, and it was supported by this guy, which makes a lot of sense since this guy stood to profit from having one specific version of BASIC in operation, especially in Asia, versus many offshoots of this guy's code. Oh no, that guy, Mr. William Gates. So the MSX is, yeah, I know. The MSX is just, it's debatable, but it's really just us meddling with Japanese computers and saying that we want to build a standard that it's like really easy for us, kind of like, because everyone was using a certain kind of BASIC. By 83, 84, like IBM was basically becoming some kind of standard AT. And so moving in AT and then ATX and I guess ST, moving all of those things together and kind of coming up with something that everyone agreed on made the IBM compatible, basically. So the idea was like, maybe we should just do this in Asia too, where they have all these competing companies, et cetera, et cetera. But of course he stands to profit because he owns BASIC. So like, he wants everyone using his system. So wait, MSX, think a little bit about who's involved here. Well, there's a bit of controversy surrounding this name. So some people say that, and Microsoft said when the MSX was doing well, that it was called the Microsoft Extended BASIC. That's what it actually means, the format. The second that MSX was not doing well, they had no clue. No, we never said that. It was never anything related to Microsoft. And it's pretty documented that actually happened, so it's actually pretty funny. They decided to completely abandon it, and we'll get into that in a second. When Nishi said it, he said it was machines with software exchangeability. And if you've ever seen articles or anything with Nishi, he's a pretty eccentric dude, and this perfectly fits his personality. If you ever want to know anything about him, this really long worded thing is exactly what he would call it. But then he also, for some reason, in another interview, said it was missile experimental, which is the MX missile, which is I think it's a Peacemaker missile, I believe, if I recall. And then he also said that he couldn't name it that because the Acura NSX, he wanted to name it the Nishi Standard Extended or something, and he couldn't do that because Acura did it. So there's officially, I looked up about 5 interviews, and I think he's just trolling us because I don't think he knows what it's supposed to be. Oh, or Microsoft basically told him, don't ever say that it's Microsoft, you have to say something else. So, we'll see. But if I ever wanted to talk to him, I'd really want to get. That's one thing I'd love to really know, and the resources on it are not great. So, okay. So this partnership was all in good until this one Dino-y boy appeared. This is the MSX dinosaur. This is one of my favorite stories in all of video games and everything. If anyone's a fan of the Retro Game Audio podcast, we laughed about this for a long time. We had to stop recording, I think. When we did it, we were 20 minutes because we were laughing. So Nishi was so pumped up, and I think it was October 86, so pumped up that he'd sold 1 million units that he took Bill Gates' money and threw this huge convention here. And so this is a convention he used Bill Gates' money to throw. He hired the people who do Godzilla to make a 30-meter tall dinosaur, right? That was programmed on, I think, every 2 hours to make a huge roar. I want to get the roar. That's something we need to do. Everyone needs to track down, find the MSX dinosaur roar. I want to know what it sounded like. I'd love to just go back and hear it. I'd love to see who would actually know what that was. Nishi probably doesn't even remember what it sounded like. And this computer is capable of PCM, so it probably was just an actual dinosaur roar. But I like to imagine it was some kind of crazy noise channel thing that sounded horrible and made people upset. Oh, so this dinosaur cost, in 1986 money, $750,000. So, and he used Bill Gates' money for this. So he brings out the dinosaur. the sales of MSX were already kind of floundering because the PC-98 became kind of affordable, which eventually, if anyone knows anything about the history of Japanese computers, the PC-98 was the standard. The 88/98 was the computer until guess who came back? Microsoft, and Windows 95 made them obsolete. So Bill Gates wins in the end. This dinosaur was the last straw for Bill, and that's when he decided to kind of lose the standard. And I think he actually backcharged Nishi like $500,000 and said he owed it personally to Microsoft. So, yeah, I mean, 230,000 people showed up to this event. It was like, it's even funnier. It was like, I think it was like 2 months long or something like that. It was a trade show, though. They had like all the different systems laid out. I've seen some pictures where they have like the different systems and you can try them. It's pretty cool. Like I probably would have really enjoyed this, with this huge Godzilla monster. Anyway, that was probably the end of their partnership, and that's kind of where the MSX story sort of ends. MSX kind of peters out around 1993. This was around when the MSX2 standard happened, so they kind of updated it. And then by then it was starting to do kind of poorly, and eventually it just kind of petered out. It was a noble attempt to make a standard. I think Nishi was really into it, but I think what really ended up happening is just that once he lost that Microsoft support money, all the other companies were just like, forget it, we're not going to follow this anymore. Nice. Deal with it. But we're here to talk about sound, right? I always do this on Retro Game Audio. I really like talking about the history. I like sound, but I like history more, I'd have to honestly say. So I get jazzed up about this stuff, but all right, we'll just talk about the sound chips and not the history. All right, so I'm glad no one laughed at that. So there's a couple different sound chips that are the standard. Of course, the AY is the standard. Hold on, let me turn the stupid thing on. The AY is the standard sound chip for this thing. You have to hold a bunch of stupid buttons to start this thing, too. Let's see if it works. Hey, okay, cool. We're now officially in DOS mode here. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll talk about some of these sound chips. We'll play them. This is the very standard sound chip. On MSX1, this is the standard chip. On MSX2, this is the standard chip. And I have a little thing. It's the PSG. 3 channels. It's kind of iconic. I've heard people who are wizards with this chip. I suck at it. I don't know. I've never been able to make anything good on it. But it's got a fat sound. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but we are going to do some listening of music from it. So let's play a little MSX AY music. Let's hope it works. Let's see which one I have.
Are you taking questions in the meantime?
Yeah, sure.
How does that vary from the Master System PSG as well?
Oop, what was that? So it's different. So the Master System PSG is, let me do this here because it's actually on the feed. The Master System PSG is the SN chip, which is 4 channels. It has 2 octaves that are missing. The AY goes down 2 octaves lower. That's why when you listen to SN chips, it's usually like ticky-tacky and tinny in like a very kind of charming way, but it also kind of sounds like a toy a little bit in a charming way again. But so yeah, and the AY definitely, I think it's 2 octaves, 1 octave. I'm on the spot, but it definitely has more depth. And the noise channel is better on the AY, and there's also filtering on the AY. The other one, the SN chip is 4 channels, 3 of them are static squares that you can't do anything to, basically. And then there's like a toggle for 3 different cycles of noise, I believe, on the 4th channel, which it's nice, but it's not as fat as the AY. All right, let me play some AY. Goonies. That's enough of that. The second you guys started clapping, I knew it was over. So then it's interesting. It's interesting because then part of the standard, which was brought in and then brought out, was there's actually an OPL, not OPLL, but OPL, which is what, the YM38. I never remember the freaking name of this thing. Numbers are numbers, right? But this is a more powerful chip. It's on the stupid screen. It's I can't remember the number. There it is right there. This is the Y8950, which is a variant of the OPL. It includes, so it's like regular OPL, but it also includes a ADPCM channel. So you could do samples with it. This was brought in '84, and I'm pretty sure that MSX Dinosaur Land made sure this never became a thing because it's much more expensive, and once this chip came out, it was just cut. This was never used in any MSX game, but you could buy adapters to play music through it. I don't have an example because it was never played in any game, so it's kind of like, we'll get into a couple other things, but yeah, there's some other stuff like that. The other thing it has too is part of the standard for MSX2+, meaning that it had to be, if you had an MSX2+, you had to include it, is the handy YM2413 or the OPLL, which is, kind of a workhorse chip. I don't have anything I hate about this chip. And I think that the MSX, I'd have to say that MSX uses the OPLL the best of any console. I'd argue that. I don't know any other console. Master System does okay, but I think that the stuff that they were doing here was really creative. So I'm going to play a song which I think is the song that everyone wants to hear. Yeah, it's Goonies again. Arguably, the OPLL version I think is better than some of the other versions. It really rocks. And you get that extra AY channels in there too. Oh, it's so good. Oh, it's so good. So I'll just leave this on in the background. Let me turn it down a little more. There we go. So the other thing we got here too is Konami STC, which is a wavetable based chip. It's similar to TurboGrafx 16. Has a great sound, and paired with the AY, it's pretty cool. Let's listen to a track from that. Sorry. Oh. That's such a good track. That's such a good track. I didn't want to turn it off. That's what I'm saying sorry about. All right. I hope this is the right one. Sorry. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So this chip was often paired with the AY for good effect. I guess it's a cool chip. You can write for it. You can use Trilo Tracker on it, which is a native tracker for the system. Trilo Tracker is glitchy on the system. It doesn't work very well. I don't know if anyone ever used Blue MSX, the official emulator for it. It runs a little better on it, and if things break, then you don't have to worry about it. It has a great sound, but it's harder to use. There's not as much stuff for it. And 18 games used it. It's Konami's proprietary. It's kind of like their VRC6 for MSX. Okay, cool. That's just going to go on forever. Sorry. Okay. So the other thing that was interesting is that it was standard, but not standard, but was standard, is the YM2151, which is the OPM, which is one of the more powerful FM chips, the first FM chip. It's 8 channels, and it sounds good. I mean, you can do a lot with it. It's powerful in that you have all 8 of those channels to mess around with. Fortunately, normally you end up having to use 2 of those channels for drums by the nature of the beast. This was included on the Yamaha models only, and the Yamaha models were companion models to the DX7 keyboard, if anyone knows the DX7 keyboard. It basically was boo, yeah. The CX5, Yamaha CX5M or the CX5 series, there's a CX7 series, I believe, as well. Those were basically like, you attach it to your DX7, or you attach your DX7 to it, and you could basically use it to write the patches instead of using the insanity that is the DX7 internal system. The problem is, those they're MSX ones, so they have 16K, and they're slow. I think if you know how to use, really good patch writers on DX7 could probably do it faster. It's also something that, as of late, has become very expensive. I don't know, like, because people like synths and they're just dropping a lot of money on it. But so included in that, there's a way that you could use DX7 to control the OPM. So there's an OPM module. I have one right here. This guy right here. Actually, I was having problems with this. I'm not going to pick it up. It's working right now, so if I move it, it might not. But the module is basically like a cart that kind of fits under it that just contains literally an OPM. And it would allow you to play back things, et cetera, et cetera. It was never included for any gaming purposes. This is supposed to be included on basically a synthesizer computer. So let's take a listen. What I did is I played this track before, but I wrote something in DefleMask, imported it into a VGM file, which you can play off MSX, and you can just, DefleMask supports OPM, so I'll just play that. Or not. Hold on. Sorry. I think I moved it. There you go. Okay, I mean, there's a lot of untapped potential for that because it wasn't included, but so these are, if you had an MSX back in the day, these are about the 5 chips that you would have access to. Yes?
The Yamaha sound chip that song you just played, what was that from?
I made it. Sorry. Maybe someone want to buy it, like for a soundtrack, and then it'll be like. I am working on a shmup where I am using the OPM, but that was like a demo track for that, and that game's been going for like 4 years. I say, everyone's like, "Oh, what's this for?" It's like, "Oh yeah," it's one of those things where you bounce emails back and forth between someone. But that game's going to be exciting if it does come out. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so. The really interesting thing about the MSX is because it's a cartridge-based thing, it's basically just like the NES, and so that the NES, if anyone's not familiar with, the NES has an expansion audio slot basically, like it has 2 pins that basically dictate if you're putting an expansion audio through it, meaning that you can extend the audio capabilities of the Famicom technically by accessing these 2 pins, basically bolting something on via the cartridge and playing it back, right? MSX has that exact same capability, and it's a computer, and it has all kinds of, different kinds of, this is still playing, sorry. All kinds of different menus, et cetera, and capabilities, because, I can run DOS on this. So I can physically use a file structure to kind of run things back. What it basically means is that if you can dream it from that era, this thing can play it back, right? So, okay, let's play what can the MSX replace? Let's see, what do you think it can replace? Like, just name a console. Genesis? Yeah, it can replace Genesis, obviously. I played it earlier, but it can, with some limitations. And so, for the Genesis, it can replace it based on the chips. If we had a YM2612 and we actually put it on there, it would work. So yeah, it can replace Genesis. Basically, it can replace any Yamaha chips, I'll just tell you that. Because like most of the Yamaha chips are all built to have an entryway or something that goes towards it, basically. And anything that can like command it or take control of it, yeah, you can just grab it. That's fine. Yeah, no, it's fine. He's trying to be discreet, and I'm like pointing him out. But you can basically use any Yamaha chip or any chip that you can actually like send commands to. Some of them are kind of like bolted in. Again, I'm not technical. I could be completely bullshitting on this, but what I was basically described as is that any chip that you can actually send a signal to communicate with, you should be able to control with an MSX, basically. There are some limitations to that, some things that you can't speak to, or like if you have to speak to it, it's like super complicated. Anything else? What else? What are we talking about here?
How about an FM Towns?
FM Towns Marty is YM2612 plus, I guess it's the Sega CD PCM, which is Oki 625896. I always get those two confused. Yes, it could technically. The problem is, though, is that there's a different hertz rate. And since that the FM Towns Marty's PCM channels they don't line up correctly, there's a Japanese dude, I really wish I wrote it down. He has Turbo R's, like the best of these computers, and he plays like he can play like, basically Sega arcade machine music or whatever that has the YM or the 2612 and the PCM next to it, and it starts to go, and then the PCM starts to get a little ahead, and then it falls apart. But it's theoretically possible. Someone really smart could figure it out. Like, it was just like he slammed 2 cartridges in, and he's like, it played. That's a lot of what this is. Anything else?
Sound Blaster 32.
Yeah. Easy. There's an OPL4 right here, so that's something it can do as of now. This system has an OPL4, which means everything that an OPL4 can play, this thing can play easily, perfectly. That opens up a huge world of many things, and replaces possibly buying a vintage old Sound Blaster card for like $700 or whatever they're charging. Someone, like, I think Lego, you were talking. Someone was talking to me about, like, as an ad-lib card. Yeah, like, jeez. Or you can just buy this for like $70. It's not the original card, but you don't need a whole setup for it. So yeah, can replace that. The one thing that I think that I can say that we are having trouble replacing in the community is actually Nintendo, or the NES/Famicom. The 2803, as far as I know, and I've talked to David Viens from Plogue, he was like a genius. He basically said it can be done, but it's like not really fun to like put the chip on there. Simply because it is one of those kinds of systems where you have to like cram stuff into it. It doesn't necessarily have a passageway to like command it from the outside. It commands from the inside, basically. But almost everything that you can possibly think of in some shape or form could be played on here. There's been talking about using, what's the off the top of my head, the Apple IIGS's sound. That's the ESQ1. That's a keyboard. But it's like it's an Ensoniq special thing. The Apple IIGS had it's the Apple II graphics and sound, so it has a proprietary sound thing. That could easily be done. This can already send out MIDI. Like right now, out of the box, it can communicate in MIDI. This is all because when they set up BASIC, they had they basically made a BASIC programming that's almost exactly identical to what we were doing in the States. So they didn't have access to this stuff, but later on, we just started installing it and it worked. So having a standard actually made it really easy for us later to be like, oh, we know how to do this, because this didn't come over here for a very long time in terms of anyone knowing it. The only way that you would have known it is if you had one of those Yamaha computers for your DX7, and everyone who had one said it sucked. And most of the time you can find one that's brand new because no one used it. So let's take a look. Are we gonna go? Okay. It can. Yep. The OPL4 has coverage for that. Here's a couple sound chips, and here's a couple things we can replace out of the box on the system right now. Okay, so OPL-L, which is already in here, you can use that based on it being actually inside the device itself, or get an FM pack. I think I brought one just to be funny. Yeah, I did. Yeah. This is wacky thing. This is an FM pack. This is just an OPL-L, and it actually has save state memory in it, which is really cool. When I got it, someone had a completed file of Final Fantasy that I was able to load the final dungeon and play through because it's impossible to play through otherwise. You can also get a Carnivore cartridge. The Carnivore cartridge it's like similar to like the flash cartridge I'm using now, but I've been told it's much more complicated to use. So there's only one thing that it really can replace. It's the Sega Mark III, and the Sega Mark III only at one time I'll get to it in a second because I'll do that when I talk about the SN. But there's only one time in Sega Mark III that it actually uses the SN plus the OPL-L. You can play that on here. So the other thing it can do is it can do OPM, which we talked about. But because it can do OPM, you can replace some of these consoles. So I put asterisks next to this. You can play back Sharp X1 music. The Sharp X1 was a contemporary to the MSX as an 8-bit computer. It's a predecessor to the much more powerful and like much more sought after X68K. The X68K is it's a beautiful machine. The Sharp X1 was interesting though because the Sharp X1 Turbo, which was the final model of it, had the OPM plus AY chip. So there's some really interesting things you can kind of do with that. We'll play some of that in a second. And you can replace Sega 16/32 board. It's not going to be exactly right, and that's why it says there's a compatibility issue, so we'll talk about that in a second. I'm going to do these first 3 here, and then we're going to move to a different chip. But we also have, basically, there's the SN, which the SN is the Game Gear, Sega Mark III, Sega Master System, and Sega Pico chip, that kind of tinny chip, so you can also use that here. What I will do is I'm going to play the OPM stuff, and then I have to do a little gear swap here. So let's listen to a couple different things. I have, and I think we were playing it before, I have Sorcerian. Sorcerian's for X1 Turbo is probably the best X1 Turbo soundtrack, and in my opinion is the best Sorcerian soundtrack. So what happens is because of the compatibility issues, you'll notice that this is actually going to be a lower pitch. There's not much we can do about that. The SFG01, which is the module I have here that contains the OPM, communicates with the system at a set hertz rate. Basically, it's again that kind of thing where the two things are kind of pulling apart in terms of control for sound. So what will happen is this is, I think, about a whole step lower than what it would normally be, but it works. So you don't have to have a Sharp X1 Turbo. Let's take it. I mean, you might want one, but okay. If any of you have perfect pitch, I apologize. So as I said, like you can hear that obviously, I don't know if anyone is familiar with the soundtrack, it's lower, but you can play everything from the X1 down a step. Which, I mean, it's kind of cool. Like if you just have this around and you're composing for it, I often just like tend to listen to that soundtrack. I even made an executable file that just plays the soundtrack in order so I don't have to pay attention to it. Let's listen to some Sega 16 music here. It works under extreme duress, but it works. Like I said, under extreme duress. Of course. 1 second, let me see if this will work. Okay, got it. All right, I'm gonna try to make sure you don't hear the duress part. All right, we know how it goes. Okay, I'm going to do a little gear swap here, but so yeah, the OPM is like actually one of the most accessible things. You don't really need anything like really special to get the OPM to work on this. A lot of them, basically, you don't want to buy a Japanese one. Japanese ones cost a ton of money. The CX5 was not as popular there, and it basically needs a card adapter. I can show it now. So it is just a cart, like a big old cart, and it fits in there. But the problem is this cart is actually designed for the American model, so they put 2 extra pins on here to make it extra longer, but that's all they did. Nothing's connected to those 2 pins. So it's like kind of them doing like copyright protection or whatever. So you could buy this, the Yamaha has the official cable. This thing is probably like $70 by itself if you find it, and this will take it And if you even look in here, if anyone wants to see, you can even see in there, like maybe you can, that there's no copper on the edge over here at all because it doesn't connect to that. So it's like when, what was it, like Sega Genesis, they just made a different shaped cartridge hole for it to go in, and that was the way they were trying to make it so that you couldn't import from other places. There's no actual like region protection on it. You can also just make one. This is one of Trackman's ones, and he just literally made it, and I was using it, but it's not as reliable, so I didn't use it today. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the other things we can do here. The obvious thing on this list here is, let's talk a little bit about the OPL4. So let me plug that in. We'll show you first. This is the OPL4 module. This is Shockwave. There's a couple different ones of them. This one happens to be the one that I have. But there's better ones, I think, and cheaper ones that we're starting to find. This is by Technobytes. It's pretty cool. It has an out too, so you don't have to actually mix it through the system, and you don't have to get, so it's pure, pretty pure out. And I mean, you can play pretty much whatever you want on here, so I'm just gonna play a couple tunes here. No. There we go. I may as well mention this. This is the cart extender. It's beautiful. Except that I think that I've had two of these, and this is the only one that works, and one of the slots doesn't. So again, a lot of what the community is doing is homebrew, and so with homebrew comes problems. So this will probably have to go back to Europe after this. Okay. Oop, that's not what I want to do. It did not work. Okay, hold on. Sorry, 1 second. Okay.
Turn off the MCX each time you switch cartridges.
What was that?
You have to turn off the computer each time you switch cartridges.
You do, yeah. Otherwise, it'll screw it up. Okay, that didn't look good either. Hold on 1 second. Just plug it back in. I'm having all kinds of cartridge problems. It's beautiful. Good time.
Going back in time.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. Oh, no, the channel's off. Hold on. What? There you go. Okay, good. We're good. $64K RAM. That's what we're dealing with. All right, cool. So the one thing that was already mentioned is, can this play Amiga mods? Well, yes. So yeah, it can. And it can play basically anything in mod format. It's going to read it through. It has 32 channels of PCM, so it will automatically adjust. I don't know, 32 channels sounds excessive. This is like, do people do that? Do they really do that? So it will just pick it up. There's a mod player built in to the device itself. And it literally just picks up the samples, shows you their names, and it works. I took the DW file, the David Whitaker file or whatever, and I messed with it and made it into a mod, and it worked. I took a bunch of different mods, I moved them around. Mods that were like some random websites, they all play. So pretty freaking cool, right off the chip. So that needs to say, like we were talking a little bit about Sound Blaster support for here. Yes, we have that as well. Slow computer, slow. All right. I have to physically run this one. Wolfenstein. I mean, with the OPL4, you can do all kinds of stuff. It's like it's impossible for me to show you literally everything you can do. So just take my word for it. It plays like every possible thing you can think of. Like it collects it, which is nice. What's really cool about it, though, is that this is all possible through the proprietary software that people have made, so that it detects it and plays it, which is very important to it. And so, like, you know, why does it have Amiga support and mod support? Cool homebrew people were like, let's make this program for MSX. And how can we do that? Well, we already kind of know how to do DOS because we've been programming it forever. And basic is basic, basically. Basically. So one thing I don't have, which is interesting that I found out about, is that PlaySonic also makes just a straight up SID chip thing with the options of picking either of the two. It works great. I also saw that there is OPL4 support for SID playback, which I tried playing back and I could not get to work on my machine, but apparently it does work on some machines. So you can get really bad unfiltered SID music on your C64. And I'm sure if I played it, there'd be a lot of frowns in the audience. So even if it worked, I heard it on the website. It's like, well, it's possible. It's like, yeah, it's possible. It doesn't mean we should do it. So the most exciting thing that I think here on it, well, OPL4 is probably really exciting to people, but the most exciting thing here is that last one right there. The OPNA is kind of like to a lot of people, the white whale, or like the chip that everyone really is excited about, I think, in terms of FM. And we've been able to, through the virtue of everyone's favorite troll, I'm a TrackMan and also a good guy, but TrackMan managed to build basically an OPNA module for this with help from a couple different guys in the scene. So this basically is just an OPNA. I'll show it to you. If I can take this out. Oh, I shouldn't take it out. 1 second. This is the first prototype right here. It's basically just an OPNA on a dead, like a board here. This is eventually going to have some kind of more features on here. This is very basic. It's not mixed high. There's no amps on it. You can't control the volume from here. You have to control it outside. So there's definitely features, and it's definitely something that we're trying to source just in terms of what people want for features on this. But this thing can do a lot of stuff. The OPNA is a very compatible chip, being not the first one in the family, but one of the having backwards capability with a lot of things. So with this, you can get anything from PC-98 or 88 music, which is a huge library. That includes the OPN and OPNA, because this is backwards compatible with it. It also, through some kind of crazy math and science, can play Sega Genesis music, because it is technically the sister chip of the OPN2, which is what's in the Sega Genesis. And because that this is a OPNA that's a good model without bad amps and a bad system or an ASIC board or something like they have on the Sega Genesis, long story short, this should be some of the best audio you can get for Sega Genesis right here, as opposed to using a Sega Genesis in most cases, unless you do some mods. So I'm happy for that, because Sega Genesis audio out is wonky and not particularly great. So let's play around with this. Good. It worked. You have to disable, every time it loads, it has to disable all the other features in there. And since I flashed things to it, it keeps trying to read the disk drive, and there's no disk drive. It's a long thing. All right, we're powered up here. Okay. All right. I see. I just see what you're saying. I see that. I'm very smart. I am a professional. 1 second. Okay, it's still loading the samples, so this may or may not pop. Hey, buddy. Want to wake up a little bit? There you go. I'm just playing, Kosuro right now. There you go. Let me turn down the internal. There we go. So yeah, I mean, like, basically any PC-98 song that you can possibly think of that you can find in a VGM format, which says something, you can play there, because not everything can be found in VGM. You can also use, I think the standard proprietary format for PC-98 and PC-88 is S98. There's one of them. You can convert them to VGM, but it has some issues with its compatibility. So it works. It's a very young product, so there's a lot of weird glitches with it, which is kind of the issue. We'll get into that in a minute. Let me play like a couple more tracks here.
Oh, it's not loud. All right.
Run, risk. So this is an example of it playing an OPN song. This is Xenon, which is Ryu Umimoto, which is fantastic. It's a great soundtrack. And to be able to play it on real hardware is kind of the best thing ever. But yeah, I mean, I just downloaded the VGM, put it on here, and pressed play, and it worked. So there you go. Nicely produced. So I played it earlier, but this does allow for Sega Genesis playback. Issue with it, though, is that the OPNA, I'm not trying to go over people's heads, but there's a sample channel in the OPN2, which is the Sega Genesis chip, which is assigned to the 6th channel. The OPNA does not have that. The OPNA has just 6 channels, which means that any Sega Genesis song that you have will not play back the samples, which that sucks, because a lot of it is sample-based, but this isn't. I have one more example. Hold on. Let's see if I can find it. I do this. What's that? Let's see. I threw something in here last minute that I thought was really cool. I just have to find it now. Did I make a folder for it? Scheme stars. East. It's right here. It's loading. Also doesn't use samples. This will be good background music to talk about this boring stuff now. Okay, so let's just say you were insane enough to actually want to do this. How would you do it? And one of the things I've learned by buying a lot of these and understanding how, like, all their weird quirks and issues, I've really wanted to kind of share that knowledge with people so they can actually just buy these and like do this themselves. I don't want to like drive up the prices or anything. Some people have been mad at me about that, but I really want people to like just be able to kind of build something like this because it's actually pretty damn affordable. And like if you're like me, like I have like 30 dead computers in my house that like don't work, and these are pretty reliable as opposed to like my dead X68K, which makes me really sad. Yeah. So how can we do this? What are we going to need for this? Let me turn it down just a little. Okay. So in order to build this, we're going to need a couple things. You're going to need an MSX 2 or better, 2 Plus or Turbo R preferred, the more powerful versions. You need a flash cartridge of some kind. I use Mega Flash ROM. It's available for, I think, it comes out to $140, I think. There's cheaper options. The Carnivore is $70. I can tell you that the Carnivore flash cartridge, in my experience, is a lot more difficult to use. It like almost requires you to have an MSX to set up that already has a flash card, unless there's some particular way that you're supposed to do it. I've talked to people who've had issues with it. The Carnivore is nice though because it also includes an OPLL on it, so you don't have to buy an extra cartridge for that or whatever. Then you have to buy the audio and sound cartridges. So what's really nice is once you buy an MSX, you can start to just slowly accumulate these other cartridges you need to play. Out of the box, if you buy the right one, it's always going to play AY. OPLL is pretty standard, and then you can kind of add to your library depending on which one you use. Makoto is going to be, which is the OPN board, is going to be under $100. That's the goal. So, that would be pretty good. You need Grau's VGM Play by Lorenz Holst, who made the VGM file for this and actually edited this so I could play Sega Genesis music for you guys. So, like, that's pretty cool, right? Other niceties, most of these things have a RCA out with mono, so it's like just AV regular, but the AV looks freaking terrible. Like, it's horrible. But they all, part of the MSX Standard is just a standard RGB out. So if you have our RGB, you can get a JP21 SCART. Some of you are speaking the right language too. You can get a JP21 SCART and convert it over, or you can build your own cable. It's simple. It's just a 5 or 7 pin DIN and just assign it and move it over. Slot expander board, there's a bunch of different ones. That's definitely something that's on my list to make one down the line. I'm not the technical muscle behind this, but I know people who are, so that would be really fun to have. And obviously you have to have some kind of money to spend. This is not like super cheap, but it is definitely cheaper than importing like an X68K, I can tell you that. So a couple thoughts here, and I'll just hit the main points because I know I'm kind of running low on time. If you buy one of these things, I bought about 50 of these from Japan over the years, and like sold some on eBay and kept probably too many of them. But there's a couple things that you'll have to know about these. If you're buying them, the major problem with them is their keyboard. Their keyboard is built on a membrane that's kind of inside here. That keyboard membrane is probably either worn if someone actually used it, or battery acid damage because this actually has 2 AA batteries in it. I'd say about 1 in 3 systems that I purchase, which is a really high fail rate, I'll tell you, have some kind of issue with the keyboard. It's not easy to fix it. You either need to get a membrane from another computer because it's a proprietary membrane per system, of course, or have someone build it. And there was a guy in Brazil who was doing it, but I think that there was so much demand that like he now doesn't talk to Americans anymore. He's mad at us. I referred him so many times, and he just ghosts people. And it's like, we just want a membrane. It'll be really cool. Like, let's do it. It'll be great. So you have to do that. Like what I do is when I've been selling MSXs, and I think that you should look for this, is look for someone who puts like in one of their pictures like some kind of picture that shows all the keys working. If they can go to basic and just type everything, every key is working basically. There's no way to like fake that. You have to be able to press all the keys. So ask for keyboard output if you're looking for that. Sound problems is another issue. It's computer by computer, but there are definitely sound problems built in here. The audio and video is a complete, I think it's one specific circuit kind of built in together. They tend to go at the same time, basically, because the capacitors are right in a cluster over here. And so a lot of them, I can tell you, I had Panasonic A1F computer, which is, it kind of looks like one of these. I had 5 of them, and all of them had different volume rates. I'd have to keep adjusting my TV every time I put them in because there's something wrong with them. That's something you have to consider. So, if you know how to repair caps, there's a lot of value out there. But if you don't, you should just avoid them. And the same goes with that. Video output is a really big issue there too. So if you want to buy a model, you can just start big. This is the GT. This thing is like $1,500, okay? And why is it $1,500? Because everyone wants one, and then there's not many of them made. This is the last model of MSX made in 1991, I believe. And so that's almost 10 years after it came out. This model is awesome. It's the fastest model. It has a specially designed 16-bit processor in it. This theoretically could be the best to play music off of. No, we have not done any testing about what it can and can't do because we don't have one. So theoretically, we think that it should cure some of the weird hiccups that you get when you have an MSX computer, but we really don't know because we haven't worked with one because they're $1,500. My goal is to acquire one here. I'm sure my wife is very happy about that. Maybe no, I'm not going to sell anything. So fastest MSX, most RAM as a built-in PCM channel, which we believe might actually be able to be routed to the Sega Genesis PCM. We're experimenting with that. And it's also MIDI capable. Straight out of the box has a MIDI plug in it really quick. The other guy is your friend. I have one of them here. This is about 150 to 250 bucks. It's an MSX2. This thing will get the job done. It's definitely a good computer. I've bought and sold many of these, and they're built like a tank. You never usually have any huge problems with it. Major issue I can tell you is that the, what's it called? The plugs for these are super expensive. Don't buy one of these if it doesn't include, the wall wart with it. I think I have one right here. How can I miss it? Yeah. This thing is a monster. It weighs probably like 2 pounds. And there's a capacitor that takes up like the entire bulk of it inside here. This thing has the most irritating thing that anyone could have done. This is a proprietary, only used on this system plug. And that makes it more valuable than the system in most cases because everyone has one of these, but no one has one of these. So if I see a cheap plug, I tend to buy it because I tend to come across a lot of these. But yeah, if it doesn't have the plug, avoid it. It doesn't include OPLL, so you'll have to buy an OPLL at some point, So this is basically standard. I've had very little problems with this particular model. So if that's what you're looking for, I think there's like 10 on eBay right now at reasonable prices. They're not even mine. And I would say 150 to 250 is what you want to spend. It's often missing the cart door, but who the heck cares? If you're just going to use it for audio playback, it's pretty reliable. And the keyboards have been the most reliable. I found one of them where it looked like someone had actually just like smashed into the keyboard with their elbow, because when I opened it up, the plate inside was actually dented this way. I took the plate, I put it on a desk and pushed it down and the keyboard worked. So like that's how they're built. If you open it up, it looks like someone built this by hand. If you want to split the difference, I use a WSX. I like the WSX because it has the OPL built into it, and the S part of it stands for S-Video. So you don't have to go RGB, you can just go S-Video, which is a very happy medium. The S-Video is a very easy and accessible thing. Anyone who has an old CRT, even bad old CRTs, tend to have an S-Video. This thing's been kicking around for like maybe 15 years, and I've used it pretty much with this the entire time. Built-in turbo mode too, so you get like a baby turbo. You can actually put a command in BASIC here to overclock it to 5.37 megahertz, so you can run things faster. There's not many things compatible with it, and it just looks like garbage most of the time, but that might help with the music. I haven't experimented it too much. And you can get this for a little bit more than what you're getting for the other one, about $300 to $350, but I've seen them go with like some issues, maybe a broken disk drive, for about $280. And like I wouldn't pay much more than $350 for one, unless it was like a really special one. But that basically is the only one you'll ever need if you buy that. So it just things to think about. I wanted to really share this stuff because I don't think that anyone ever talks about like the hardware and what you should do with it. And I have this experience that like no one cares about. This is the right venue to share it. Do not buy list. Don't buy an MSX1. A lot of MSX1s look beautiful. They were greatly designed, and there are a bunch of companies. They're kicking around the internet all over the place for like a bunch of money. They don't play anything. They don't do anything. They're not compatible with the SCC as far as I know. They just have an AY chip on it, and they can't even use the flash card DOS version. The DOS on the flash card requires an MSX2. So it basically loads BASIC, and that's all you can do. I would avoid it. Some of them are really good. The Sony hit bits are like that, like some really cool colors and stuff like that. Unless you just want to put it on the on the shelf, that's respectable, I guess. But if you want to use it, don't buy that. Here's some models to avoid. Any models with a suicide board, and like at the end of the panel, if you'd like to go see the suicide board, I have it. This is the MSX A1 Mark II, which is similar to the one I was just showing you. Ready? Watch this. That's a capacitor. Well, I'll show it to you at the end of the panel. I'm kind of running out of time, but inside there, basically, the capacitors come off. There is a small board here, as you can see right there. This board here has onboard, what's it called? It doesn't have like floating caps. It has the little surface mount caps. There you go. And those big onboard caps leak onto the surface mount caps, and they all die. I can tell you that a lot of these have that issue. The FSA1 and this one don't. But any of the models here, the Mark II, or the Mark I I wrote, but the Mark II, FSA1F, and unfortunately a lot of the really great Sonys have this problem. And the Sonys like the XDJ, which is over there, that's an MSX2 Plus. They're pretty beautiful looking machines, but I've had many issues with them. And even TrackMan, whose primary unit is that unit last there, he had to replace the caps like twice on it already because he's trying to figure out where it is. And the sound still requires him to be like twice as loud when he plays it on TV than he normally needs to. So I know if you're like really smart about this stuff, like there's opportunity with some of these things because like they're broken and you can fix it. But for some reason too, a lot of these models are more expensive than the models I showed you. Sony's tend to be like $50 more. I don't understand why, because most of them are broken. So I would just be careful about that. Okay. Where can you find them? All right, well, eBay is one choice. Look at that, 2002 eBay logo. Look at that, I did it up for you guys. Easy to navigate, you buy it now. US sellers you can often talk to, and a lot of Japanese sellers sell on there with free shipping, which is plus or minus. Cons, it's expensive. Also, it's expensive. And there's numerous traps. There are a lot of guys who sell these two models, which require that proprietary plug, for the same price as the models with the plug, and don't say anything about it. And then like it's like you get everything you see here is what they specifically write, and then they get it, and then that same guy is selling the plug for $90. So I've noticed this game a little bit, and I called the one guy out on it, but he still does it. So I'd be very careful, especially on the A1s for that, because make sure it includes the plug. Like I cannot emphasize that enough. Don't have to worry about that with the WSX or a lot of other models, but just check to make sure that you have everything you need before you bid on this kind of stuff. You can also go into Y auctions, like a boss, as they say. But there's a large selection. It is kind of dizzying, I'd say, because you don't know what the hell you're supposed to do in a lot of cases. Marginally better prices. I say marginally because, yeah, you got a good price. It's going to cost you $90 to ship it to you. Because if you use like a service like Bai, unless you use C-Mail, which if anyone's ever used C-Mail, it's freaking terrifying. It takes like 3 months and you have no tracking on it. And I've seen pictures online of what happens when something has 3 months at sea. So you can ask, I think Brendan Becker got a PC-98. Like he posted a picture of it. I don't know if anyone's ever seen that picture. And the box is like this. It's like a square box, but it's like completely banged in and everything. I would not do that. I'd pony up the extra money. You're spending $200. You may as well spend another $70. I know that sounds callous, but like you should do that. And like I said, if you buy it from Japan, you get that extra smugness factor too. I bought this from Japan. There's very good documentations for most auctions too. Y auction people are nuts. They write every single little thing line by line by line, which is really great and very helpful. And like services like Bai are really, really, really good about making sure if you pay them enough that what they got is what was in the auction and that it works. So Bai is a good example. I think there's a couple other like middleman companies. And if you know Japanese, obviously just use Y auctions or proxy or whatever you need to do. Like I said, the shipping is terrible. Most auctions are as is, which is scary. I just got burned on one recently where the guy's like, hey, it works. And it was like a new in box and everything. And it's a beautiful unit. And he shows it playing or whatever, turned it on, no sound. Like completely no sound. But like, why would someone who's like, this is their brother's old computer check the sound? You know what I mean? Like that's something. So you kind of wanted to see all that stuff. So it's kind of, hit or miss. Yeah, I'm sorry. So the idea behind all this is like, hopefully this sparks some kind of interest into MSX computers. I think that they're pretty freaking cool. It's one thing though that we can do here though is that there's a lot of smart minds in this room and there's a lot of smart minds in this community in the US. The scene right now is mostly in Brazil, in Europe, and in Japan. We have a couple people in the US doing these things, but hopefully demystifying some of the stuff about this gets more people on dev for this because it's a pretty accessible system and there's a lot of things we can do with it. We have a lot of old tech. I mean, I just played a show and I'm like cursing at my Nintendo because it's not working correctly. It'd be great to future-proof some of this tech as much as we can. And so having other options instead of having to results for audio playback, instead of having to have all these consoles and everything, to be able to just put the MSX down and have a mess of wires like this as opposed to Amiga and X68K and X1 and PC-98, all this stuff all over the place, and like, you know, an old IBM with like a multiple Sound Blaster cartridges, you can just do this. Like, this is a mess here, but this pretty much replaces a line of consoles and like basically screens all the way to the end over there. And I think that that's something that we can even take advantage of. We could do TurboGrafx with this. We could do, I mean, if we really want to, we could do 2A03. This out of the box can already do all the expansion audio for NES. If you figured out how to do it. So there's a lot of things that we can do already. No one's done it yet. And that's why, like, you know, like, Trackman asked someone, like, could we do OPNA for MSX? They're like, yeah. It's like, why haven't we done it? It's like, well, we could have. So like, then we just got the schematics, and he made this in like 2 weeks. So, okay. There's one thing here, and I'm done. We can answer questions in the hallway because we got.